When Michael Jordan returned to his old high school in Wilmington, North Carolina, he expected to find memories of his basketball beginnings. What he didn't expect was to find Mr. Wilson, the same janitor who had believed in him when he was cut from the varsity team, still mopping the gym floors at 80 years old. The discovery stunned the basketball legend. While most people in Michael's position would have offered a handshake, maybe an autograph, and continued with their day, Michael's response to seeing his elderly mentor still working would set in motion a chain of events that no one could have anticipated. What began as a simple school visit would transform not just the lives of Mr. Wilson and his wife Martha, but Michael himself, and ultimately an entire community. The question wasn't whether Michael would help his former mentor, it was how far he would go to repay a debt of gratitude decades in the making. No one, not even Mr. Wilson himself, could have predicted what Michael Jordan would do next. Michael Jordan's black SUV pulled into the parking lot of Emsley A. Laney High School. The afternoon sun bounced off the windows of the building where his basketball journey had begun more than 40 years ago. Michael sat in the car for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel. "You sure you want to do this, Mr. Jordan?" asked his driver, who had moved to the passenger seat. Michael nodded. "Sometimes, you need to remember where you started to make sense of where you ended up." He stepped out of the car, his knees creaking a little. At 62, he wasn't the high-flying athlete who once seemed to defy gravity, but he still moved with purpose. He straightened his golf shirt and adjusted his baseball cap lower over his eyes. Maybe he wouldn't be recognized right away. Maybe he could just soak in the memories first. The main entrance had been updated since his days here, but the school colors remained the same. Michael pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. The hallway was quiet. School had ended an hour ago, but some kids were still around for after-school activities. Two boys walked past, deep in conversation about video games. They didn't even glance at the tall man standing there. Michael smiled to himself. Back in his day, he hadn't been the Michael Jordan yet either. Just Mike, the skinny kid who got cut from varsity as a sophomore. He followed the familiar path toward the gym, passing trophy cases that now included his jersey and photographs. There was an entire section dedicated to him. Newspaper clippings, his high school stats, and pictures of his visits over the years. He hadn't been back in almost a decade. The smell hit him as soon as he pushed open the gym doors. That mix of floor polish, sweat, and rubber that was the same in every gym in America. Some things never changed, but the gym itself had. New bleachers, a shiny electronic scoreboard, and on one wall, a massive mural of Michael soaring through the air in his Chicago Bulls uniform. The words, "Believe in your dreams," painted in bold letters beneath it. "Well, that's new," he muttered to himself. The gym wasn't empty. At the far end, a girls' volleyball team was practicing. Their coach was shouting instructions as they took turns serving. None of them noticed the basketball legend standing in the doorway. Michael walked along the edge of the court, memories flooding back with each step. This was where Coach Pop had told him he wasn't ready for varsity. This was where he had stayed after hours, working on his jump shot until his arms ached. This was where he had promised himself that no one would ever doubt his abilities again. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the old man slowly pushing a dust mop near the bleachers. There was something about the way the man moved, careful, deliberate, taking pride in his work, that seemed familiar. Michael watched him for a moment. The old man wore blue work pants and a gray shirt, with the school's name stitched above the pocket. His back was slightly bent, his hair white as snow. He moved slowly but steadily, making sure no spot was missed. "Excuse me," Michael said as he approached. The old man looked up, squinting a little. "Gym's closed for volleyball practice, sir. Unless you're here for one of the girls?" "No, I'm just visiting," I used to go to school here. The janitor nodded. Lot of folks come back to visit. Must have graduated some time ago? Class of '81, Michael said. '81? The old man whistled. That's going back some years. I was already working here then. Michael stared at him, suddenly seeing past the wrinkles and white hair. Mr. Wilson, is that you? The janitor tilted his head, studying Michael's face. Do I know you, son? It's Michael. Michael Jordan. Mr. Wilson's eyes widened. He leaned his mop against the wall and took a step closer. Little Mike Jordan? Is that really you? Michael grinned. Not so little anymore, Mr. Wilson. Well, I'll be... Mr. Wilson shook his head in wonder. Michael Jordan, right here in person. He hesitated, then held out his hand. Pardon me for not recognizing you right away. Eyes aren't what they used to be. Instead of shaking his hand, Michael pulled the old man into a hug. Mr. Wilson felt fragile in his arms, like a bird. When they separated, Michael noticed the janitor's eyes were watery. I can't believe you're still working here, Mr. Wilson. It's been, what, over 40 years? Mr. Wilson nodded. 47 years, next month. 47 years? How old are you? Now, if you don't mind me asking, just turned 80 last week, Mr. Wilson said with a hint of pride. 80? Michael couldn't hide his shock. And you're still working full-time? Got nowhere else to be, Mr. Wilson said with a small shrug. And the school still needs cleaning. Michael looked at this man who had been quietly working in the background all these years. He remembered how Mr. Wilson used to unlock the gym early so he could practice before school. How he would stay late, never complaining when Michael wanted just 5 more minutes of shooting time. How he would offer quiet words of encouragement on days when nothing seemed to go right. You remember how you used to let me in early to practice? Michael asked. Mr. Wilson's face lit up. Sure do. You were always first one in, last one out. Never seen nobody work so hard. He chuckled. Used to have to practically kick you out. So I could go home for dinner. My mom would get so mad at me for coming home late, Michael recalled, smiling at the memory. But it paid off, didn't it? Mr. Wilson gestured toward the mural on the wall. Look at you now. From across the gym, the volleyball coach blew her whistle. The practice was ending. Girls were gathering their water bottles and gym bags. I should finish up here, Mr. Wilson said, reaching for his mop. Got the hallways to do before I clock out. What time do you finish? Michael asked. About 6, usually. Do you think we could catch up when you're done? Maybe grab some dinner? Mr. Wilson looked surprised by the invitation. You want to have dinner with me? Don't you have important people to see? Michael put his hand on the old man's shoulder. Mr. Wilson, right now, you're the most important person I want to see. The janitor's eyes crinkled with his smile. Well, in that case, I accept. But nothing fancy. These old bones don't fit so well in fancy chairs anymore. I know just the place, Michael said. I'll meet you at the front entrance at 6. As Michael walked back through the halls of his old high school, his mind was racing. Mr. Wilson had always been old in his teenage eyes, but now the man was 80 and still pushing a mop around these floors. Something about that didn't sit right with him. By the time he reached his car, Michael Jordan, the man known for his competitive fire and determination on the basketball court, had made a decision. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Mr. Wilson's life was about to change. Michael waited by the front entrance at exactly 6 o'clock. He had spent the last hour making some calls, canceling a dinner with business partners, and rescheduling his flight back to Charlotte. Some things were more important than business. The school had emptied out. Only a few cars remained in the parking lot. Michael leaned against the wall, checking his watch. At 6:15, the main doors opened and Mr. Wilson shuffled out. He had changed from his work uniform into a clean button-up shirt and khaki pants that hung a little loose on his thin frame. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Mr. Wilson said. "Principal, Jenkins wanted to chat when he saw me leaving all dressed up." "No problem at all," Michael replied. "My car's over there." Mr. Wilson's eyes widened at the sight of the luxury SUV. "We riding in that? Fanciest thing I've been in was my nephew's Cadillac at his wedding." Michael opened the passenger door. "Hop in." As they drove through Wilmington, Mr. Wilson pointed out changes in the city. New buildings where fields used to be, old shops that had closed down, the movie theater where he used to take his wife on date nights now turned into a clothing store. "I was thinking we could eat at Katie's Diner," Michael said. "Is it still around?" Mr. Wilson's face lit up. "Sure is. Been there since the 60s. You remember that place?" "Best chocolate milkshakes in town," Michael said with a smile. "My dad used to take me there after games." Katie's Diner looked exactly as Michael remembered. Red vinyl booths, black and white, checkered floor, and photos of local sports teams on the walls. In fact, there was a faded picture of Michael's high school team by the cash register. A middle-aged waitress approached their table. "What can I get you?" She stopped mid-sentence, staring at Michael. "Oh my goodness, are you—" Michael nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. Could we get 2 menus, please?" The waitress hurried away, whispering to her co-workers. Soon, everyone in the diner was sneaking glances at their table. "Sorry about that," Michael said to Mr. Wilson. "Happens sometimes." Mr. Wilson chuckled. "Must be strange, being recognized everywhere you go." "You get used to it," Michael replied. "But enough about me. I want to hear about you, Mr. Wilson. All these years at Laney High, that's dedication." The old man shrugged. "It's just a job. Someone's got to keep the place clean." "But why are you still working at 80? Most people retire long before that." Mr. Wilson's smile faded slightly. "Well, retirement's for folks who can afford it, I suppose." Before Michael could ask more questions, the waitress returned with their menus and a basketball for Michael to sign. After ordering their food, cheeseburgers and those famous chocolate milkshakes, Michael steered the conversation back. "Tell me about your family, Mr. Wilson." The old man's eyes brightened. "Got my wife, Martha. We'll be married 58 years next month. 2 kids, James and Lynette, both living out west now. 4 grandkids and 2 great-grandchildren I haven't met yet." "That's wonderful," Michael said. "Martha, I remember her bringing you lunch sometimes. Still does, once a week. Tuesdays, makes me a ham sandwich with the crusts cut off." Mr. Wilson laughed. "Treats me like I'm still 40. Their food arrived, and as they ate, Michael asked more questions. He learned that Mr. Wilson had started working at Laney High in 1977, just a few years before Michael became a student there. Before that, he had served in Vietnam and then worked at a factory that closed down. "Never thought I'd be a school janitor," Mr. Wilson admitted, "but it turned out to be the best job I ever had." "Why's that?" Michael asked. "The kids," Mr. Wilson said simply. "Watching them grow up, being a small part of their lives." He took a bite of his burger. "Like you. Saw you go from a skinny sophomore to the star of the team." "I wasn't always a star," Michael reminded him. "I got cut my sophomore year." "I remember that day," Mr. Wilson nodded. "Found you sitting alone in the gym after everyone left?" Michael put down his milkshake. "You remember that?" "Sure do. You were shooting free throws in the dark. Wouldn't even turn on the lights. Just the sound of the ball hitting the rim. over fee, and over. The memory came flooding back to Michael. The disappointment, the anger, the determination. "You know what you said to me that day?" Michael asked. Mr. Wilson thought for a moment. "Can't say I recall exactly. You said, sometimes the best players are the ones who have to fight for their spot. Then you handed me the keys to the gym and said I could practice as long as I wanted, as long as I locked up when I was done." Mr. Wilson's eyes crinkled with his smile. "Well, look at that. Gave advice to the greatest basketball player of all time." "That meant a lot to me," Michael said seriously. "You trusted me with those keys, made me feel like I was worth something, even after getting cut." "You were always worth something," Mr. Wilson replied. "That's true for every kid, whether they become famous or not." They finished their meal, sharing more memories. Mr. Wilson told stories about other students he had helped over the years. The troubled boy he'd mentored who was now a police officer. The girl who'd run away from home, who he'd found sleeping in the gym and helped reunite with her family. When the check came, Michael insisted on paying. "Let me drive you home," he said, as they left the diner. Several people had approached for autographs, but Michael had politely explained he was catching up with an old friend. Mr. Wilson gave directions to a neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The houses grew smaller and more worn down as they drove. Finally, they pulled up to a modest single-story home with peeling paint and a small front porch. "That's our place," Mr. Wilson said. "Not much to look at, but it's home." Michael noticed the sagging roof, the cracked walkway, the railing that looked like it might give way if leaned on too hard. "Would you like to come in?" Mr. Wilson asked. "Martha would love to see you." "I'd be honored," Michael replied. As they walked to the door, Mr. Wilson moved slowly, gripping the wobbly railing for support. Michael fought the urge to help him, sensing the man's pride. "Martha!" Mr. Wilson called as they entered. "You'll never guess who I brought home for a visit." From somewhere inside the house came the sound of wheels rolling across hardwood. A moment later, an elderly woman in a wheelchair appeared. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and despite her frail appearance, her eyes were bright and alert. "James Wilson, what are you up to now?" she started to say, then gasped when she saw Michael. "Oh, my stars! Is that—" "Yes, dear," Mr. Wilson said proudly. "Michael Jordan himself. Came to visit the school today and remembered your old husband." Martha Wilson's hand fluttered to her heart. "Michael Jordan in our living room. I never thought I'd see the day." Michael bent down to shake her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Your husband was very important to me when I was in high school." As he straightened up, Michael looked around the small living room. The furniture was old but clean. Framed family photos covered the walls, and there, on a side table, was a scrapbook with a familiar red cover. "Is that—" Michael pointed to the book. Mr. Wilson picked it up, looking slightly embarrassed. "Just some newspaper clippings I saved over the years, about you and some other kids from school who did well." He opened the scrapbook to reveal carefully preserved articles about Michael's career, from high school games to his final championship with the Bulls. Michael swallowed hard. All these years, Mr. Wilson had been tracking his success, taking pride in it as if Michael were his own son. And here the man was at 80, still mopping floors, living in a house that was falling apart, with a wife in a wheelchair. In that moment, as he stood in the humble living room of the man who had quietly helped shape his future, Michael Jordan made another decision, this one even more determined than the last. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Jordan?" Martha Wilson asked, already wheeling herself toward the kitchen. "Please, call me Michael. And coffee would be great, thank you." he replied, settling onto the worn sofa. Mr. Wilson eased himself into his recliner with a small grunt. These old joints aren't what they used to be. Michael looked around the small living room. Despite its shabby condition, everything was spotlessly clean and arranged. With care, framed photos crowded every surface. Children in graduation caps, a young couple on their wedding day, babies in Christmas outfits. "Your family?" Michael asked, nodding toward the photos. "Our pride and joy," Mr. Wilson confirmed. "James Jr. lives in California now, works for some computer company. Lynette's in Arizona with her husband and kids." "They don't visit much?" Michael asked carefully. A flash of sadness crossed Mr. Wilson's face. "They try. Plane tickets aren't cheap, and they've got their own families to support." Martha returned with a tray of coffee cups, moving her wheelchair skillfully through the narrow doorway. "I apologize for the cups," she said. "They're nothing fancy." Michael accepted the steaming mug. "These are perfect, Mrs. Wilson." "Oh, please, it's Martha," she insisted. "Mrs. Wilson makes me sound like my mother-in-law." They laughed, and Michael felt the tension ease. He sipped his coffee, wondering how to approach the questions burning in his mind without seeming rude. Martha saved him the trouble. "So, I'm guessing you're wondering why James is still working at his age?" she asked directly. Michael nodded. "I was surprised to see him still at it." "We don't have much choice," she said simply. "The school pension isn't enough to live on these days, and with my medical bills." She gestured to her wheelchair. "What happened?" Michael asked gently. "Stroke. 3 years ago," Martha explained. "Lost the use of my legs. We had to convert the dining room into a bedroom because I can't manage the stairs anymore." Mr. Wilson reached over and took his wife's hand. "We're managing just fine." "Is there help available?" Michael asked. "Government programs or something?" The Devi Wilsons exchanged glances. "We get by," Mr. Wilson said firmly. "We don't take handouts." Michael recognized the pride in the old man's voice. It was the same pride that had kept him working all these years instead of asking for help. "Tell me more about your time at Laney," Michael said, changing the subject. "You must have seen a lot of students come and go." Mr. Wilson's face brightened. He began sharing stories from his decades at the school, the changing fashions and music, the different principals he'd worked under, the transformation from typewriters to computers. "Remember that time Coach Smith caught those seniors trying to put a cow in the principal's office?" Mr. Wilson asked, chuckling. Michael laughed. "I do. They couldn't get it to go back down the stairs." "Had to call the fire department," Mr. Wilson added. "Poor cow was mooing like crazy." Martha smiled at their exchange. "James has always loved working with the students. Comes home every day with new stories." "The kids keep me young," Mr. Wilson agreed, "even if they don't always notice the old janitor." "I noticed," Michael said quietly. Mr. Wilson studied him for a moment. "Yes, you did. More than most." Michael set down his coffee cup. "You know, I never told anyone this, but after I got cut from varsity, I was ready to quit basketball." Both Wilsons looked surprised. "Really?" Martha asked. "But you were so talented." "I didn't feel talented then," Michael admitted. "I felt like a failure. I cleaned out my locker and everything. Was going to tell my mom I was done." "What changed your mind?" Mr. Wilson asked. Michael looked him directly in the eye. "You did." "Me?" Mr. Wilson seemed confused. "What did I do?" "I was sitting in the locker room after everyone left, trying not to cry. You came in to clean up, but you didn't know I was there. I heard you talking to Coach Pop in the hallway." Mr. Wilson's forehead wrinkled as he tried to remember. You told him he'd made a mistake cutting me, Michael continued. You said you'd seen me practicing when no one was around, and that I had something special. You told him that someday he'd regret not giving me a chance. I said that? Mr. Wilson asked, genuinely surprised. Michael nodded. I never forgot it. After I heard that, I decided I wouldn't quit. I'd work harder than ever and prove you right. Martha wiped a tear from her eye. James never told me that story. I don't even remember saying it, Mr. Wilson admitted. Just must have seemed like the truth at the time. It changed everything for me, Michael said earnestly. Knowing someone, even just the school janitor, believed in me when it felt like no one else did. The room fell silent for a moment, 3 people contemplating how small moments can alter the course of a life. You didn't just help me that one time, Michael continued. You unlocked the gym for me every morning at 5:30. You stayed late so I could keep practicing. You even fixed that outside hoop at my house when the backboard cracked, remember? Mr. Wilson's eyes lit up. That's right. Your daddy and I attached a new one. Used marine plywood so it would last through the rain. It's still there, Michael said. My brother told me the new owners of the house kept it. Martha reached for the scrapbook and opened it. James has followed your whole career, cut out every article. The pages were filled with carefully preserved newspaper clippings, high school game reports, college highlights, NBA draft news, championship celebrations, even advertisements Michael had appeared in. I always knew you'd do something special, Mr. Wilson said softly. Just had that look in your eye, that hunger. Not everyone saw it, Michael reminded him. Well, some people need glasses, Mr. Wilson joked. They laughed again, and Michael felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. Here in this small, run-down house was someone who had believed in him before the world knew his name. Someone who had helped shape his future without asking for anything in return. As the evening went on, they shared more stories. Mr. Wilson talked about other students he'd helped over the years. The girl who forgot her science project, and he'd let her in early to finish it. The boy who couldn't afford a prom suit, and Mr. Wilson had given him his own. Why did you do all that? Michael asked. It wasn't your job to help us kids. Mr. Wilson thought for a moment. Maybe not, but seemed to me that everyone needs somebody in their corner, especially young folks trying to find their way. He shrugged. I was just in the right place at the right time. By the time Michael looked at his watch, it was nearly midnight. I should let you both get some rest, he said, standing up. Will you be in town long? Martha asked. I was supposed to fly out tomorrow, Michael replied. But I think I'll stay a few more days. At the door, Michael shook Mr. Wilson's hand. Thank you for everything, not just tonight, but back then. I owe you more than you know. You don't owe me a thing, Mr. Wilson insisted. Just glad to see you doing so well. As Michael walked to his car, he pulled out his phone and made a quick note of things he'd observed in the house. The crack in the ceiling, the uneven floors, the bathroom doorway too narrow for Martha's wheelchair, the medical supplies stacked in the corner. On the drive back to his hotel, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the Wilsons. How many other students had Mr. Wilson helped over his 47 years at Laney High? How many young lives had he shaped with his quiet kindness? And now, at 80 years old, he was still mopping floors while his wife struggled with health issues in a house that was falling apart around them. It didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair. By the time Michael reached his hotel room, the decision he'd made earlier had grown into a plan that would require resources, discretion, and perfect timing. He sat on the edge of the bed and began making calls. The next morning, Michael called Mr. Wilson at the school. "Good morning, Laney High School," a young voice answered. "I'd like to speak with James Wilson, please," Michael said. "The janitor?" Hold on." Several minutes passed before Mr. Wilson came to the phone. "Hello? Mr. Wilson, it's Michael Jordan." "Michael? What a nice surprise. Martha and I were just talking about your visit last night. Made us both feel young again." Michael smiled. "I was wondering if I could drive you home after work today? I'd like to take some photos of that scrapbook of yours, if that's okay." "Well, sure." Mr. Wilson sounded surprised but pleased. "I get off at 6 again. I'll be there," Michael promised. After hanging up, Michael spent the day making more calls. To his business manager, to his lawyer, to a contractor in Wilmington he'd found online, to an old friend from UNC who now worked in healthcare. At 5:45, Michael parked outside Laney High School and waited. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Students streamed out of the building, backpacks slung over shoulders, laughing and shouting to each other. Mr. Wilson appeared at 6:05, looking tired after a full day's work. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting," he said as he climbed carefully into the SUV. "Not at all," Michael replied. "How was your day?" "Same as always. Spills to clean, papers to pick up. Bathroom toilet overflowed again in the science wing." Michael winced. "At 80, you shouldn't be dealing with overflowing toilets," Mr. Wilson shrugged. "It's all part of the job." As they drove, Michael casually asked questions about the Wilsons' house, how long they'd lived there, if they'd ever considered moving, what repairs it needed most. "Been there 35 years, Mr. Wilson said. "Bought it when prices were low. Couldn't afford anything like it now, that's for sure." "And repairs?" Michael prompted. "Oh, always something. Roof leaks when it rains hard. Plumbing's old. Since Martha's stroke, we've been meaning to widen the bathroom door for her wheelchair, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" Michael asked. "Money's tight," Mr. Wilson admitted. "Between Martha's medication and regular bills, there's not much left for fixes." When they pulled up to the Wilson home, Michael noticed details he'd missed in the EV dark last night. The sagging gutters, the cracked concrete path, the wooden ramp that had been hastily built over the front steps, already showing signs of rot. Martha greeted them at the door, her face lighting up at the sight of Michael. "What a lovely surprise," she exclaimed. "I thought James was making up stories when he said you might come back today." Michael bent down to hug her gently. "I wanted to see that scrapbook again, if you don't mind." "Of course not. I'll make us some iced tea." Inside, Michael asked if he could take photos of the house to show his mother. The Wilsons agreed, though they seemed a bit embarrassed. "It's not much to look at," Mr. Wilson said. "It's a home," Michael replied. "That's what matters." As he walked through the small house, Michael discreetly used his phone to document everything. The narrow hallway where Martha couldn't maneuver her wheelchair, the bathroom she couldn't access without help, the kitchen cabinets she couldn't reach, the back steps that prevented her from enjoying the small garden she had once loved. In the converted dining room that now served as their bedroom, Michael noticed a hospital bed for Martha and a twin mattress on the floor for Mr. Wilson. "James couldn't fit in the hospital bed with me," Martha explained when she caught Michael looking, "and our old bed was too high for me to get into safely." "So he sleeps on the floor?" Michael asked, trying to hide his shock. "It's just temporary," Mr. Wilson said quickly, "until we figure something else out." Michael swallowed hard. This proud man who had helped shape his future was sleeping on the floor at 80 years old. They settled in the living room with the scrapbook and iced tea. Michael took photos of each page, while the Wilsons told stories behind some of the clippings. "Remember this game? Mr. Wilson pointed to a yellowed newspaper article about a high school championship. How could I forget? Michael grinned. Coach, nearly had a heart attack when I took that last shot. But you made it, Mr. Wilson said proudly. Never doubted you would. As they talked, Michael noticed small things around the house. The thermostat set at 78 degrees, probably to save on air conditioning. The TV that looked at least 20 years old. The worn carpet patched in places with duct tape. When Martha excused herself to use the bathroom, Michael heard Mr. Wilson helping her, murmuring encouragements and endearments as if they were still newlyweds. She hates needing help, Mr. Wilson explained when he returned. Martha's always been so independent. How long have the doctors said she'll need the wheelchair? Michael asked. They said she might walk again with intense physical therapy. Mr. Wilson replied, but insurance only covered 10 sessions. He shrugged. So we do what we can at home. Michael nodded, adding another note to his mental list. After about an hour, Martha began to look tired. Michael noticed and stood to leave. I should get going, he said. Thank you both for your hospitality. Will we see you again before you leave town? Martha asked. Michael smiled. Actually, I've decided to stay in Wilmington a bit longer. I have some business to take care of. At the door, Mr. Wilson shook his hand firmly. It means a lot that you took time to visit us. Most folks from your world don't look back once they make it big. You're important to me, Mr. Wilson, Michael said simply. More than you know. Back in his car, Michael reviewed the photos he'd taken. The house, the scrapbook, the makeshift bedroom, the narrow doorways, the rotting porch. Each image strengthened his resolve. He called his driver. I need you to pick me up at the Wilson house and take me to meet someone, he said. And bring my laptop. We have work to do. 20 minutes later, Michael was in the back seat, showing the photos to a local contractor named Dave Thompson. Can it be fixed? Michael asked. Dave scratched his beard. Sure, anything can be fixed. But this place needs more than a few repairs. It needs a complete overhaul. How long would that take? To do it right? With permits and everything? At least 2 months? Michael shook his head. I need it done in a week. Maybe 10 days, max. Dave laughed, then realized Michael was serious. That's impossible. Unless what? Unless money is no object, and you've got a whole crew working round the clock. Michael looked the contractor directly in the eye. Money is no object, and I want the best crew you can find. Dave's eyes widened. You're really going to do this? For the old janitor? He's not just an old janitor, Michael said firmly. He's the man who believed in me when no one else did. Dave nodded, understanding. I'll need to see the inside. Tomorrow, Michael promised. I'll arrange for the Wilsons to be out of the house. We'll have a few hours to measure everything. As they shook hands, Michael added, one more thing. This stays absolutely quiet. No social media, no press, nothing. You got it, Mr. Jordan. Back at his hotel, Michael made more calls. Long after midnight, he was still at it, his notepad filled with names, numbers, and ideas. When he finally lay down to sleep, his mind was racing with possibilities. The plan was taking shape, but there was still so much to do, and the clock was ticking. Michael tossed and turned all night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mr. Wilson mopping the gym floor with his bent back. He saw Martha struggling to maneuver her wheelchair through doorways too narrow for comfort. He saw the proud couple living in a house that was slowly falling apart around them. At 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep. He sat by the window of his hotel room, looking out at the quiet streets of Wilmington. The city had changed so much since his childhood days But some things remained the same. Good people struggling to get by, kindness going unnoticed and unrewarded. "It's not right," he muttered to himself. He thought about his own journey. The fame, the fortune, the 6 NBA championships. None of it would have happened if he had quit basketball after being cut from varsity. And he might have quit, if not for Mr. Wilson's belief in him. How many other lives had the old janitor touched over his 47 years at Laney High? How many students had he encouraged with a kind word or a small gesture? And now, at 80, the man was still working, still giving, while his own needs went unmet. Michael picked up his phone and scrolled through the photos he'd taken at the Wilson house. The sagging roof, the narrow doorways, the mattress on the floor. Each image strengthened his resolve. But it wasn't just about fixing a house. The Wilsons needed more than that. They needed financial security, health care, a way to enjoy their remaining years without constant struggle. Michael opened his laptop and began researching retirement options for school employees in North Carolina. The numbers confirmed what he already suspected. The pension was barely enough to survive on, especially with added medical expenses. Next, he looked into health care costs and insurance coverage. The gaps were significant, especially for someone like Martha, who needed ongoing therapy and equipment. By dawn, Michael had filled pages of notes with ideas and possibilities. The sky was lightening outside his window when his phone rang. It was his business manager calling from Charlotte. "Mike, I've got the numbers you asked for," she said. "It's doable, but it's going to require some creative financial planning." "Whatever it takes," Michael replied without hesitation. "You're really serious about this?" "More serious than I've been about anything in a long time." After the call, Michael showered and dressed. Despite his sleepless night, energy surged through him. This project felt more important than any business deal or investment he'd made in years. At breakfast in the hotel restaurant, he made more calls. To a medical equipment supplier, to a financial advisor who specialized in retirement planning, to a lawyer who could set up a trust. At 9 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a text from Dave the contractor. "Got a crew ready to go. When can we start?" Michael smiled. Things were moving faster than he dared hope. His next call was to Laney High School. "This is Michael Jordan," he told the surprised receptionist. "I'd like to speak with Principal Jenkins." Minutes later, a nervous-sounding man came on the line. "Mr. Jordan, this is such an honor. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about James Wilson," Michael explained. "I understand he's been working at Laney for 47 years?" "Yes, that's right. Mr. Wilson is an institution here. I'd like to arrange something special for him, but I need your help keeping it a secret." Principal Jenkins was immediately on board. "Anything for Mr. Wilson. And anything for you, of course, Mr. Jordan." They discussed details, and the principal agreed to give Mr. Wilson a week off with pay under the pretense of a special maintenance project that would temporarily close the school. "We can manage without him for a week," Principal Jenkins assured Michael, "though it'll be the first time in nearly 5 decades. After hanging up, Michael reached out to a travel agent to arrange accommodations for the Wilsons during the renovation. He needed something comfortable, accessible for Martha's wheelchair, and not so fancy that it would make them uncomfortable. By noon, Michael had been awake for 30 hours straight, but he felt no fatigue. This mission energized him in a way he hadn't felt since his playing days. He drove to a local diner for lunch, choosing a corner booth where he wouldn't be easily recognized. As he ate his sandwich, he watched the people around him. The waitress, with tired eyes who still managed to smile at every customer. The old couple sharing a piece of pie, still holding hands after all these years. The young mother trying to manage 3 small children while eating her own meal. Everyday people doing their best, just like Mr. Wilson. Michael thought about all the people who worked behind the scenes in his own success story. Coaches, teachers, trainers, even the team doctors and equipment managers. People whose names weren't on championship trophies, but who made those championships possible. Mr. Wilson was part of that invisible support system, the kind of person who makes the world better without seeking credit or recognition. By the time Michael paid his bill, he had made up his mind about something important. This project wouldn't just be about helping one elderly couple, it would be about acknowledging all the Mr. Wilsons of the world, the unsung heroes who change lives through small kindnesses and unwavering belief in others. Back at the hotel, Michael finally allowed himself a short nap. He dreamed of basketball courts and mop buckets, of championship rings and school janitor keys. In the dream, Mr. Wilson handed him a key that somehow unlocked his future. He woke up with a renewed sense of purpose and a clear vision of what needed to be done. The project had grown bigger in his mind, more meaningful, more impactful. Michael reached for his phone and dialed another number. When the call connected, he spoke without preamble. "Scotty, it's MJ. I need your help with something important." "I'm in," Scottie Pippen said without hesitation after Michael explained the situation. "Just tell me when and where." "That's what I love about you, Pip. No questions asked." "I don't need to ask questions. If it's important to you, and it's about helping someone who helped you, I'm there. Period." Michael felt a wave of gratitude for his former teammate and friend. They'd won 6 championships together, reading each other's moves on the court like they shared one mind. Now, years later, that connection remained as strong as ever. "I'll text you the details," Michael said. "And Scotty, not a word to anyone. No social media, no press, nothing. You know me better than that, MJ." After hanging up, Michael made another call, this time to his friend Ahmad, who worked in home health care. Ahmad had helped set up care for Michael's mother years ago. "I need the best wheelchair-accessible bathroom design possible," Michael explained, "and recommendations for physical therapy equipment that could help someone recovering from a stroke." "I know just the people," Ahmad promised. "I'll have plans and equipment lists to you by tomorrow morning." The calls continued throughout the afternoon. Michael reached out to former teammates, business contacts, and old friends from his North Carolina days. Each conversation ended the same way, with a promise of help and an agreement to keep the project confidential. By evening, Michael had assembled a remarkable team: contractors, designers, healthcare specialists, financial advisors, even a few former NBA players who happened to be good with their hands or had experience in construction. He called Dave, the contractor, to arrange a meeting. "I've got a space reserved at the Marriott Conference Room downtown," Michael told him. "8 o'clock tonight. Bring your best people and any plans you've already started." "We'll be there," Dave promised. "And Mr. Jordan, this is going to be something special." At 7:30, Michael arrived at the hotel conference room. He had arranged for sandwiches, drinks, and plenty of coffee. He set up his laptop and connected it to the projector, loading the photos of the Wilson home. People began arriving a few minutes later. Dave and his team of contractors, Ahmad with 2 healthcare specialists, Michael's financial advisor and lawyer on a video call from Charlotte, a local interior designer who had worked on projects for other athletes and understood the need for discretion. By 8 o'clock, the room was full. Some people recognized each other and chatted quietly. Others stood awkwardly, unsure why they had been summoned by the basketball legend. Michael cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "And thank you for agreeing to keep this meeting confidential. What we're about to discuss stays in this room." He clicked to the first photo. Mr. Wilson mopping the gym floor at Laney High School. This is James Wilson. He's 80 years old and has been the janitor at my old high school for 47 years. He's still working full-time because he can't afford to retire. Michael clicked through more photos. The Wilson home, Martha in her wheelchair, the makeshift bedroom. His wife Martha had a stroke 3 years ago. Their house isn't wheelchair accessible. He sleeps on a mattress on the floor so she can use the hospital bed. Michael's voice grew firm. "This man changed my life when I was a teenager. He believed in me when others didn't. Now, it's my turn to help him." The room was completely silent as Michael outlined his plan. "We have 1 week, maybe 10 days at most, to completely renovate their home and set them up for the rest of their lives. It needs to be fast, it needs to be perfect, and it needs to be a total surprise." Dave raised his hand. "A complete renovation usually takes months, even with a full crew working normal hours." "This won't be normal hours," Michael replied. "I need round-the-clock work, 3 shifts, whatever it takes. Budget is not an issue, but time is." He turned to his financial advisor on the video screen. "John, walk us through the financial package." John explained the trust Michael was establishing for the Wilsons. It would pay off their mortgage, cover their medical expenses, and provide a monthly income that would allow Mr. Wilson to retire immediately. Next, Ahmad and his healthcare team presented plans for making the home fully accessible for Martha. Widened doorways, a roll-in shower, ramps, and handrails. Even a physical therapy area in what used to be the spare bedroom. Dave's team shared initial renovation plans, which quickly evolved as others in the room offered suggestions. "The roof needs to be replaced entirely," one contractor noted. "We should upgrade the electrical system while we're at it," another added. "What about the garden?" asked the interior designer. "Martha used to love gardening before her stroke. Could we create raised beds she could reach from her wheelchair?" Ideas flowed freely as the group warmed to the project. Michael watched in satisfaction as his team took shape, each person bringing their unique skills and perspectives to the challenge. "What's our timeline?" Dave finally asked. Michael clicked to a new slide showing a day-by-day schedule. "Tomorrow, I'll invite the Wilsons to a special week-long basketball camp reunion at the beach. That's our window to complete the main renovation. They'll move into the beach house on Friday. Everyone here should be ready to start work as soon as they're gone." He assigned team leaders for different aspects of the project: construction, healthcare, interior design, landscaping, and financial arrangements. "Any questions?" Michael asked when he'd finished. A young contractor in the back raised his hand. "Mr. Jordan, I just want to say, my grandpa was a school janitor for 30 years. No one ever did anything like this for him. What you're doing? It matters." The room murmured in agreement. Several people had tears in their eyes. Michael nodded, his own throat tight with emotion. "It does matter. People like Mr. Wilson matter. They change lives every day without recognition or reward. It's time someone changed their lives for once." As the meeting broke up into smaller groups discussing specific details, Michael stepped back and watched. The energy in the room was electric, the same energy he'd felt on the court during championship games. The energy of people coming together for something bigger than themselves. His phone buzzed with a text from Scotty. "Flight lands tomorrow at noon. I'm bringing 2 more guys from the old team. They want to help too." Michael smiled. His team was growing stronger by the minute. Now, tap on his shoulder interrupted his thoughts. It was Dave, holding a set of blueprints. "We'll make this happen, Mr. Jordan," he said firmly. "For Mr. Wilson, and for every unsung hero out there who deserves more than they got." Michael nodded. 10 days from now, the Wilsons' lives will be completely different. What he didn't say, what he was only beginning to realize himself, was that his own life was changing too. The next morning, Michael called Mr. Wilson at school. "Mr. Wilson, it's Michael Jordan again." "Michael, you're still in town?" "I am, and I have a surprise for you and Martha. I'm hosting a small reunion dinner tonight for some of my old teammates and coaches from Laney. I'd be honored if you and Martha would join us." There was a pause on the line. "Well, that's mighty kind of you, but Martha gets tired easily these days. Going out can be difficult with her wheelchair. I've arranged for a car service with wheelchair access," Michael said quickly. "And the restaurant has full accessibility. I've made sure of it." After a moment's hesitation, Mr. Wilson agreed. "Martha will be thrilled. What time should we be ready?" "The car will pick you up at 6. And Mr. Wilson? It's just casual dress. Nothing fancy." After hanging up, Michael called the restaurant he had booked, an upscale seafood place by the water that had a private dining room. He confirmed all the arrangements, making sure the space was wheelchair accessible and that the menu would accommodate any dietary restrictions the Wilsons might have. Next, he texted Scotty, who had just landed at the airport. "Dinner at 7. Bring Dennis and Steve. No flashy clothes. Remember, we're trying not to overwhelm them." The day passed quickly as Michael finalized details for both the dinner and the renovation project. Dave and his team were already ordering materials and scheduling workers. The healthcare specialists were arranging for delivery of equipment. That would make Martha's life easier. The financial team was setting up the trust fund that would secure the Wilsons' future. At 6:45, Michael arrived at the restaurant. The private room was ready, with a table set for 8 people. He had arranged for the table to be round so everyone could see and talk to each other easily. Scotty arrived a few minutes later with Dennis Rodman and Steve Kerr, 3 of Michael's championship teammates. All were dressed simply in polo shirts and slacks, following Michael's instructions. "Thanks for coming, guys," Michael said, as they shared handshakes and hugs. "This means a lot to me." "You said this janitor was important to you," Scotty replied. "That's all we needed to know." Dennis nodded in agreement. "Plus, any chance to be part of something that isn't about us for once is refreshing." At exactly 7 o'clock, the restaurant manager escorted the Wilsons into the private room. Mr. Wilson wore a clean button-up shirt and his best slacks. Martha was in her wheelchair, wearing a floral dress and with her silver hair neatly styled. "Michael!" Martha exclaimed when she saw him. Then her eyes widened as she recognized the other men in the room. "Oh my goodness! James, do you know who these people are?" Mr. Wilson was staring in disbelief at the basketball legends. "I sure do. Watched every game they played together." Michael stepped forward to greet them. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. Scotty, Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and Steve Kerr." Each man shook Mr. Wilson's hand and bent down to greet Martha warmly. "James has every game you played on old VHS tapes," Martha told them. "Wore them out re-watching them." "Mrs. Wilson makes me call her Martha," Michael explained to his friends. "And Mr. Wilson is the man I was telling you about, the one who opened the gym for me every morning so I could practice." "Then we owe you a huge thank you, sir," Scotty said to Mr. Wilson. "Without those early practice sessions, this guy might never have gotten good enough to help us win championships." Mr. Wilson shook his head modestly. "Michael did all the work. I just unlocked a door. Sometimes that's all someone needs, Steve commented. An open door and a chance. The group settled around the table. Michael had arranged for a special chair that would allow Martha to sit comfortably without having to remain in her wheelchair during the meal. As appetizers were served, the conversation flowed easily. The basketball players shared stories from their championship days. Mr. Wilson talked about watching their games and how the entire school would be buzzing the day after a big Bulls win. "Remember that game against the Jazz in the '98 finals?" Mr. Wilson asked. "When Michael hit that last shot?" Steve laughed. "Remember it? I had the best view in the house." "The whole neighborhood was shouting when that shot went in," Martha recalled. "James jumped so high he nearly hit the ceiling fan." Throughout dinner, Michael carefully steered the conversation to learn more about the Wilsons. He discovered that their 58th wedding anniversary was coming up next month, that their son in California was expecting another baby, that Martha had been an elementary school teacher before retiring. "How did you two meet?" Dennis asked them. "Church. Picnic," Mr. Wilson replied, smiling at the memory. "Summer of 1965. I saw her across the lawn and knew right then she was the one. He spilled lemonade on my new dress trying to talk to me," Martha added with a laugh. "Been cleaning up his messes ever since." As dessert was served, Michael brought up the subject he'd been waiting to introduce. "I have another surprise for both of you," he said. "I'm hosting a special week-long reunion at a beach house for some Laney alumni. It starts this Friday." "That sounds lovely, but we couldn't possibly," Martha began. "I've already cleared it." "With Principal Jenkins," Michael interrupted gently. "He's giving Mr. Wilson the week off with pay. And the beach house is fully accessible for your wheelchair, Martha. I made sure of it." The Wilsons exchanged uncertain glances. "It's all expenses. Paid," Michael continued. "Transportation, food, everything. It's my way of thanking everyone who helped make Laney special. Especially you, Mr. Wilson." "That's very generous, but—" Mr. Wilson seemed unsure. Scotty jumped in. "We'll all be there too. It wouldn't be the same without you both." "Think of it as an early anniversary present," Dennis added. "When was the last time you had a vacation?" Steve asked gently. Martha looked at her husband. "It has been a long time, James." "The car will pick you up Friday morning," Michael said. "All you need to pack is clothes and any medications you need. Everything else will be provided." By the end of the evening, the Wilsons had agreed to attend the reunion. As they prepared to leave, Martha reached for Michael's hand. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," she said. "It means so much that you remembered James after all these years." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Some people you never forget, Martha." Outside the restaurant, as the Wilsons were helped into their car, Michael's teammate stood beside him. "They have no idea what's coming, do they?" Steve asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "Not a clue. Man, when they see what you're doing to their house." Dennis whistled low. "It's not just about the house," Michael replied. "It's about giving them the life they deserve." As the Wilsons' car pulled away, Scotty put a hand on Michael's shoulder. "I've known you for 30 years, MJ. Seen you win championships, make millions, build businesses. But I've never seen you like this before." "Like what?" "At peace," Scotty said simply. "Like you found something that matters more than winning." Michael watched the taillights of the car disappear around a corner. In 2 days, the Wilsons would leave for their beach vacation, and the real work would begin. Friday morning arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies, and a gentle breeze coming off the ocean. Michael personally checked the beach house one last time before the Wilsons' arrival. It was a beautiful single-story home with wide doorways, smooth floors, and a ramp leading to the deck that overlooked the water. The kitchen was stocked with food, the bookshelves filled with novels Martha might enjoy, and the bathroom equipped with safety bars and a roll-in shower. At 9:30, the accessible van picked up the Wilsons from their home. Michael had arranged for Scotty to accompany them to the beach house while he oversaw the start of the renovation. At exactly 10 minutes, Michael pulled up to the Wilson home. The street was already lined with trucks and vans. Men and women in work clothes were unloading equipment and materials. Dave the contractor stood in the front yard, clipboard in hand, directing the flow of activity. "Right on time," Dave said as Michael approached. "We've got 38 workers ready to go, split into 3 shifts. We'll have people working around the clock." Michael surveyed the scene. "How long before we can start demolition?" The inspection team is already inside, checking the electrical and plumbing systems. As soon as they give us the green light, we can begin tearing out the old bathroom. The roof team is ready to start immediately. A truck pulled up carrying a portable office trailer, which was carefully positioned at the end of the driveway. Inside were detailed plans for every aspect of the renovation, along with schedules and contact information for all team members. "This is mission control," Dave explained. "Someone will be stationed here 24/7 to coordinate deliveries and work." "Schedules?" Michael nodded in approval. The operation was running with military precision, just as he'd requested. His phone buzzed with a text from Scotty. "Wilson's settled at Beach House. Martha loves it. Heading back now." That was the signal. Michael turned to Dave. "Let's do this." Within minutes, the house was swarming with workers. The roof team set up ladders and began removing old shingles. A plumber crawled under the house to inspect the pipes. Electricians examined the outdated fuse box. In the front yard, a landscaping crew was taking measurements and marking areas for new plants. Michael walked through the house, watching as furniture was carefully moved to a storage pod in the driveway. Each item was photographed, tagged, and logged so it could be returned to its exact location, or replaced with something better. In the makeshift bedroom, a worker gently removed family photos from the walls, wrapping each one carefully in bubble wrap. "These go in the special storage container," Michael instructed. "They're irreplaceable." Outside, neighbors began to gather, curious about the sudden activity. An elderly woman from across the street approached Michael. "What's happening to the Wilson place?" she asked. "Are they moving?" "No, ma'am," Michael replied. "We're just doing some repairs while they're on vacation." The woman squinted up at him. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Before Michael could answer, a large truck rumbled down the street, distracting her. It stopped in front of the house, and workers began unloading sheets of drywall. Inside, the demolition had begun. Workers wearing masks and goggles carefully removed the old bathroom fixtures. In the narrow hallway, others began taking down a wall that blocked Martha's wheelchair. "We found some water damage in the ceiling," Dave reported, showing Michael a section of discolored drywall. "The roof has been leaking longer than we thought." "Replace everything that's damaged," Michael instructed. "No shortcuts." By noon, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. Word had spread quickly. Michael could hear whispers as people recognized him. "Is that really Michael Jordan? What's he doing at the Wilson house? I heard he went to school with them." A local news van pulled up, and a reporter jumped out with a camera operator. Michael immediately walked over to intercept them. "No cameras," he said firmly. "But Mr. Jordan, the public would love to know." "This isn't for publicity," Michael cut him off. "This is private. Please respect that." After a brief negotiation, the reporter agreed to leave, promising to return when the project was complete, if Michael would grant an interview then. By mid-afternoon, the old roof was completely removed, and workers were installing new plywood sheathing. Inside, the bathroom had been gutted down to the studs. The hallway wall was gone, creating a wider passage for Martha's wheelchair. Scotty arrived, having returned from the beach house. "They're all settled in," he reported. "Mr. Wilson is already making friends with other guests. They have no idea this is all for them." "Good," Michael nodded. "What did you tell them about why I'm not there?" "Said you had some business meetings, but would join them tomorrow. They bought it completely." A design team arrived with fabric samples and paint chips. They spread them out on a folding table, discussing options that would match the Wilsons' existing furniture while brightening up the space. "Mrs. Wilson mentioned loving blue," Michael told them. "Maybe incorporate that somehow?" In the backyard, the landscaping crew had begun clearing overgrown bushes. Their plan included a paved path wide enough for a wheelchair, raised garden beds. Martha could tend from her chair, and a small patio where the couple could enjoy morning coffee. As the afternoon turned to evening, floodlights illuminated the property. The first shift of workers headed home, high-fiving the second shift as they arrived. Food trucks pulled up to provide meals for the crew. Michael walked through the half-demolished house, amazed at how much had been accomplished in just one day. The place was almost unrecognizable already. His phone buzzed with another text from the beach house, a photo of the Wilsons smiling on the deck, watching the sunset. They looked relaxed and happy, completely unaware of the transformation happening at their home. "They deserve this," Michael murmured to himself. As night fell, the pace of work didn't slow. Roofers continued installing waterproof underlayment by floodlight. Inside, electricians pulled new wiring through the walls. Plumbers installed pipes for the expanded bathroom. Around midnight, a special delivery arrived, a hospital-grade adjustable bed, large enough for both Mr. and Mrs. Wilson to sleep comfortably together. It would replace the separate beds they'd been using since Martha's stroke. "Where do you want this?" the delivery driver asked. "Store it in the pod for now," Dave instructed. "We're still rebuilding the bedroom." By 2 a.m., even Michael had to admit he needed rest. The second shift was in full swing, and the third would arrive before dawn. "Get some sleep," Dave told him. "We've got this covered. Tomorrow's another big day." As Michael drove back to his hotel, he reflected on the day's progress. The physical transformation of the house had begun, but there was still so much to do. The financial arrangements, the healthcare plans, the long-term support systems, all were being set up in parallel with the renovation. He thought about Mr. Wilson unlocking the gym doors for him all those years ago. Such a small act of kindness. The man couldn't have known what it would lead to. 6 NBA championships, a global brand, a fortune beyond imagination. And now, all these years later, Michael was unlocking a different kind of door for the Wilsons. It felt right. It felt necessary. It felt like completing a circle that had been drawn long ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Michael allowed himself to feel satisfied with the day's accomplishments. Operation Homecoming had officially begun. After a few hours of sleep, Michael was back at the Wilson house before sunrise. The third shift of workers was still going strong under bright work lights. The new roof was nearly half complete, with workers laying shingles in the pre-dawn darkness. "Progress. Report?" Michael asked Dave, who looked like he hadn't slept at all. "We're on schedule, maybe even a bit ahead," Dave replied, handing Michael a cup of coffee. "The bathroom demolition is complete. Kitchen cabinets are being removed now. Electricians finished rewiring the main living areas overnight." Michael nodded in approval. "Any problems?" "Found some termite damage in the bathroom floor joists. We're replacing those now, and the HVAC system is older than we thought. It'll need a complete replacement, not just repairs. "Do whatever's necessary," Michael said. "I want everything done right." As the sun rose, Michael drove to the beach house to check on the Wilsons. He found them having breakfast on the deck, looking refreshed and happy. "Michael!" Martha exclaimed. "We were wondering when you'd join us. This place is just beautiful." "Sorry, I couldn't be here yesterday," Michael said, taking a seat at their table. "Had some business to wrap up in town." "Your friend Scotty took good care of us," Mr. Wilson assured him. "Even helped me figure out how to work the fancy TV in the living room." Michael smiled. "Are you comfortable here? Is there anything you need?" "It's perfect," Martha said. "The bathroom is so easy for me to use with my wheelchair. I haven't felt this independent in years." Her words confirmed what Michael already knew. Their home needed these same accommodations permanently. "What's on the agenda today?" Mr. Wilson asked. "Scotty mentioned something about a boat tour?" "That's right," Michael nodded. "A private tour of the coastline. And tonight, a few more of my old teammates are stopping by for dinner." "You're spoiling us, Michael," Martha said, reaching over to pat his hand. "But we're enjoying every minute of it." Michael spent the morning with the Wilsons, taking them on the scheduled boat tour and making sure they were settled for the day's activities. Once he was confident they were happily occupied, he excused himself to attend a business meeting and return to their home. The scene at the Wilson house had transformed again. The old roof was completely gone, with a new one taking shape rapidly. A dumpster in the driveway was filled with demolished materials. In the front yard, the cracked walkway had been removed, and forms were being set for a new, wider path. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. Walls had been removed to create an open floor plan that would accommodate Martha's wheelchair. The bathroom was down to bare studs, with plumbers installing new pipes for a walk-in shower. The kitchen cabinets were gone, with outlines marked on the walls for new, lower installations that Martha could reach from her chair. "We're making good time," Dave reported. "The foundation for the back ramp will be poured this afternoon. The new windows arrive tomorrow morning." Michael walked through each room, imagining the Wilsons' reaction when they saw their transformed home. In the room that would become their bedroom, healthcare specialists were discussing the placement of equipment that would help Martha with her daily routines. "The adjustable bed should go here," one specialist pointed, "and we'll need outlets for her medical equipment on this wall." "What about therapy equipment?" Michael asked. She mentioned that insurance only covered a few physical therapy sessions. "We've got that covered," the specialist assured him. "We're setting up a small therapy area in the spare room. It'll have everything she needs for her exercises, plus some new equipment that might help her regain more mobility." By midday, more neighbors had gathered to watch the renovation. Some had brought food for the workers. Others offered to help with small tasks. What had started as Michael's private project was becoming a community effort. An elderly neighbor approached Michael as he inspected the new roof. "I've lived across the street from James and Martha for 30 years, she said. "Never seen anything like this. It's like one of those TV shows where they rebuild someone's house." Michael smiled. "Something like that. He deserves it, you know," she continued. "James Wilson is the finest man in this neighborhood. Always the first to help when someone needs it. When my husband passed, James mowed my lawn for 2 straight months without ever being asked." Stories like this came throughout the day. The mail carrier who remembered Mr. Wilson cleaning snow off the elderly neighbor's driveways in winter. The young mother whose car Mr. Wilson had fixed when her baby was sick and she needed to get to the doctor. The teenager who said Mr. Wilson had paid for his sports equipment in high school when his family couldn't afford it. Each story strengthened Michael's resolve to make this renovation perfect. This wasn't just about repaying a personal debt. It was about honoring a lifetime of quiet generosity. In the afternoon, Michael drove back to the beach house with Scotty to join the Wilsons for dinner. They found the couple playing cards with some of the other reunion attendees, actually friends of Michael's who were helping to maintain the illusion. "Michael!" Mr. Wilson called out. "You've got to meet Bill here. Turns out, we both served in the same unit in Vietnam, just a few years apart." Michael shook hands with Bill, an old friend who had been briefed on his role in the charade. Small world. During dinner, Michael's phone buzzed constantly with updates from the renovation site. He checked them discreetly, smiling at photos showing the new roof completed and the foundation for the wheelchair ramp drying in the afternoon sun. Everything. "Okay?" Martha asked, noticing his attention to his phone. "Just some business stuff," Michael assured her. "Nothing that can't wait." After dinner, the group gathered in the living room to watch a basketball game. Michael observed Mr. Wilson explaining plays to the others, his knowledge of the game impressive for someone who had never played professionally. "You really understand basketball," Michael commented. Mr. Wilson shrugged modestly. "Watching from the sidelines all those years, you pick things up. Watched you and your teammates at practice every day. Learned a lot." As the evening wound down, Michael excused himself to make a call. Outside on the deck, he spoke with Dave for an update. "The interior walls are all framed," Dave reported. "Drywall starts tomorrow morning. Cabinets arrive day after. We're still on schedule for completion by next Thursday." "Perfect," Michael replied. "They'll return home Friday morning." When Michael returned inside, he found Martha looking through a photo album she'd brought from home. She beckoned him over. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a yellowed photograph. "James at Laney High, his first year there." The photo showed a much younger Mr. Wilson standing in front of the school, broom in hand, smiling proudly in his new janitor's uniform. "He was so happy to get that job," Martha said softly. "His factory had closed, and we had 2 young children to feed. The school job paid less, but it was steady work. He never complained, not once in 47 years." Michael studied the photograph, noting the pride in young Mr. Wilson's eyes, the same pride he still carried as he mopped the gym floors at 80 years old. "He's an extraordinary man," Michael said. Martha nodded. "I've been blessed to share my life with him." She looked up at Michael. "Thank you for recognizing that. So many people look right through him because he's just a janitor." "Not me," Michael said firmly. "Never me." Later that night, as Michael drove back to the renovation site to check on the night shift's progress, he thought about Martha's words. How many Mr. Wilsons were out there in the world? How many people working essential jobs were overlooked? Or undervalued? The question stayed with him as he walked through the partially rebuilt house, now humming with activity under bright work lights as the overnight crew continued their tasks. What had started as a personal mission to help one man who had helped him was evolving into something larger, something that might inspire others to recognize the Mr. Wilsons in their own lives. By the 3rd day of the renovation, word had spread throughout Wilmington. What had begun as a private project had captured the community's imagination. People began showing up at the Wilson house offering help. A local flooring company donated hardwood for the living room. A furniture store offered to replace the Wilsons' worn-out sofa. High school students volunteered to help with painting. Even the mayor stopped by, promising to expedite any permits needed for the renovation. Michael arrived that morning to find the front yard filled with volunteers and well-wishers. "What's going on?" he asked Dave. "People want to help," Dave explained. "Everyone seems to have a story about Mr. Wilson. The guy who fixed their car, the man who helped their kid learn to read, the janitor who always had time to listen." A middle-aged woman approached Michael timidly. "Mr. Jordan, I'm Susan Matthews. I was a student at Laney when you were there. Mr. Wilson helped me too. I was hoping I could contribute something to this project. What did you have in mind? Michael asked. I own a small garden center now. I'd like to donate plants for their yard. Mrs. Wilson always loved gardening before her stroke. Michael smiled. That would be perfect, actually. We're building raised beds she can reach from her wheelchair. Throughout the day, more offers came in. A local doctor volunteered to review Martha's medical records and suggest equipment that might help her recovery. A tech company offered to install a smart home system that would allow the Wilsons to control lights, temperature, and even door locks from Martha's wheelchair. Students from the high school art department asked if they could create a special mural for one wall. Principal Jenkins arrived with several teachers and a proposal. We've been talking at school, he told Michael. We'd like to create a display case in the main hallway honoring Mr. Wilson's years of service. And we want to start a scholarship in his name for students who demonstrate his kind of quiet leadership and service. He'd be embarrassed by the attention, Michael replied, but deeply honored. We'd also like to do something for the current project, Jenkins continued. The students have organized a donation drive. They've collected about $3,000 so far for Mr. Wilson's medical expenses. Michael was touched by the gesture. Put it toward the scholarship fund instead, he suggested. I've got the medical expenses covered. By midday, the renovation site had taken on a festival atmosphere. Food trucks provided free meals to workers and volunteers. Local musicians set up in the yard, playing soft background music. Children made cards and drawings for the Wilsons. Scotty arrived from the beach, house with an update. The Wilsons are having a great time, he reported. We've got them scheduled for a spa day tomorrow, so they'll be occupied for hours. Perfect, Michael nodded. The new furniture arrives tomorrow morning. We'll need the space to move things around. Inside the house, the transformation was accelerating. Drywall was up in most rooms, with painters following close behind. The new kitchen cabinets were being installed, set at a height that would allow Martha to use them from her wheelchair. In the bathroom, tile workers were creating a beautiful walk-in shower with built-in seating and handrails. Scotty whistled as he walked through. This doesn't even look like the same house. That's the idea, Michael replied. Same home, just made to work for them now. A local news crew arrived again, requesting permission to document the project. This time, Michael agreed, but with conditions. No broadcasting until after the reveal, he insisted. And the focus should be on Mr. Wilson and what he's meant to this community, not on me. The reporter agreed and began interviewing neighbors and former students about the impact Mr. Wilson had made on their lives. One elderly neighbor choked up as he spoke. When my wife was sick with cancer, James came over every single morning to help me get her out of bed and into her chair. Never missed a day for 3 years. Never asked for anything in return. A former student, now a teacher herself, shared how Mr. Wilson had paid for her cap and gown when her family couldn't afford it. He said it was important that I walk across that stage, said he'd been saving up to see it happen. Each story painted a picture of a man whose quiet acts of kindness had rippled through countless lives over decades. In the late afternoon, a group of men in their 50s arrived. They introduced themselves as the 1981 Laney High basketball team, Michael's former teammates. "We heard what you're doing for Mr. Wilson," one explained. "We wanted to help. Most of us still live around here." Michael embraced his old friends. "Grab some paintbrushes," he said. "We've got work to do." As the day wound down, Michael gathered everyone for an update. "We're halfway through our timeline," he announced. "The structural work is nearly complete. Now we're moving to finishes. And details, every minute counts." That evening, While another group kept the Wilsons entertained at the beach house, Michael met with his financial team to review the trust being established for the couple. "The paperwork is ready," his lawyer reported. "The trust will provide a monthly income that should more than replace Mr. Wilson's salary. All their medical expenses will be covered for life. And we've set aside funds for their children and grandchildren's education." "What about the house?" Michael asked. "The mortgage will be paid in full, and we've arranged for property tax exemption through a special program for seniors." Michael nodded in satisfaction. They'll never have to worry about money again. Later, that night, after checking on the overnight work crew, Michael sat on the front steps of the Wilson home. The street was quiet now, the volunteers and visitors gone until morning. Stars shone in the clear sky above. He thought about how this project had taken on a life of its own. What had started as his personal mission to help the Wilsons had become a community celebration of a man whose kindness had touched so many lives. Maybe that was the real gift here. Not just the renovated house or the financial security, but the recognition of a lifetime of quiet service. The acknowledgement that Mr. Wilson mattered, that his work mattered, that his kindness mattered. In a world that often celebrated the wrong things, wealth, fame, power, this was a moment to celebrate something real. Goodness. Simple, everyday goodness. Michael smiled to himself. There were 4 more days until the Wilsons would return home. 4 more days to make this renovation perfect. 4 more days to prepare for a moment that would change their lives forever. And, he was beginning to realize, a moment that had already changed his own life as well. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The renovation entered its final stages as the countdown to the Wilsons' return ticked away. Michael split his time between overseeing the work at the house and visiting the couple at the beach to ensure they remained happily distracted. "Just 2 more days until we head home," Mr. Wilson mentioned during Michael's visit on Wednesday. "I've enjoyed this vacation more than I can say, but there's something about sleeping in your own bed." Michael smiled, thinking of the new adjustable bed waiting for them. Sometimes coming home is the best part of a trip. By Thursday morning, the house was nearly unrecognizable. Fresh paint covered the walls in warm, welcoming colors. New hardwood floors gleamed in the living areas, with smooth, wheelchair-friendly transitions between rooms. The kitchen featured lowered countertops on one side, allowing Martha to cook from her wheelchair. The bathroom had been completely transformed with a roll-in shower, accessible sink, and safety features throughout. "We need to talk about Mr. Wilson's scrapbooks," Dave said, as he and Michael walked through the house. "Where do you want them?" "Displayed." Michael had given this particular detail a lot of thought. "Let's build a special cabinet in the living room," he suggested. "Something with glass doors so the books are visible but protected, and good lighting so he can show them off properly." The carpenter nodded, already sketching ideas. "We can have it ready by tomorrow morning." Outside, the transformation was equally dramatic. The cracked walkway had been replaced with a smooth, wide path. A gently sloping ramp provided access to the front door. The overgrown yard had been tamed, with raised garden beds installed for Martha to enjoy from her wheelchair. A new covered patio in the backyard offered a peaceful spot to sit and watch the birds that frequented their old oak tree. The neighbors continued to contribute in unexpected ways. One brought hand-sewn curtains for the kitchen windows. Another offered to maintain the yard weekly so Mr. Wilson wouldn't have to worry about it. A local artist painted a beautiful mailbox with the Wilson name and images of flowers that Martha loved. As evening approached, Michael gathered the core team for a final review. "We're down to the last 24 hours, he reminded them. "Every detail matters. I want this house perfect, when they arrive tomorrow. The list of remaining tasks was small but important. Installing the special display case for Mr. Wilson's scrapbooks, arranging family photos throughout the house, stocking the kitchen with groceries, setting up Martha's new therapy equipment in the spare room. "What about personal touches?" asked Lisa, the interior designer. "Things that will make it feel like home right away?" "I've been thinking about that," Michael replied. "Let's contact their children and ask if they have any ideas." Within hours, the Wilsons' son and daughter had sent suggestions via email, along with digital photos that could be printed and framed. Their daughter mentioned her father's love of jazz music and her mother's fondness for fresh flowers. Their son reminded them about a special anniversary clock that had been broken for years, but held sentimental value. Michael immediately dispatched someone to find a similar clock. Another volunteer was sent to purchase a high-quality music system preloaded with jazz classics. A local florist promised fresh flower deliveries every week for a year. Late that night, as the work continued under floodlights, Michael walked through each room of the house, mentally checking every detail against his vision. In the bedroom, the new adjustable bed was made up with fresh linens. Bedside tables held framed photos of the Wilsons' children and grandchildren. A special lifting device had been discreetly installed to help Martha get in and out of bed safely. The bathroom featured a heated floor, lever-handled faucets, easy for arthritic hands to operate, and a shower system with multiple settings for comfort. A small detail caught Michael's eye. A built-in shelf held the exact brands of shampoo and soap the Wilsons used, arranged neatly within Martha's reach. The kitchen cabinets were stocked with their familiar dishes, now organized in accessible drawers rather than high shelves. The refrigerator hummed quietly, filled with fresh food. A new tea kettle sat on the stove, the same model Martha had mentioned liking during one of their conversations at the beach house. In the living room, the special display case for Mr. Wilson's scrapbooks was being installed, its built-in lighting highlighting the carefully preserved pages within. Nearby, a new comfortable recliner with a remote control would allow Mr. Wilson to elevate his feet after a long day. And throughout the house, hundreds of cards, letters, and small gifts from community members had been arranged. Students from Laney High had created a massive thank you card signed by the entire school. Former students had written letters sharing how Mr. Wilson had impacted their lives. Neighbors had brought small mementos representing shared memories. Michael paused in the hallway, where a wall of photographs told the story of the Wilsons' life together, their wedding, the birth of their children, holidays, graduations, and quiet moments of everyday joy. Among them, Michael had added a photograph of himself as a high school student, standing next to Mr. Wilson in the Laney gym. "That looks right," he said softly. Outside, the final landscaping touches were being completed, under portable lights. The new mailbox was installed at a height accessible from Martha's wheelchair. Solar-powered path lights illuminated the walkway for safety at night. By sunrise, the house was complete. The last worker packed up their tools. The final inspections were passed. The cleaning crew did one last sweep through every room. Michael stood in the driveway, surveying the transformation. The house looked better than new. It looked like a home that had been redesigned with love and attention to every detail. "We did it," Dave said, joining him. "Right on schedule." "It's perfect," Michael agreed. "Now for the hard part, keeping it a surprise for a few more hours." As the morning sun illuminated the newly renovated Wilson home, Michael sent a text. Message to Scotty at the beach house. Mission accomplished. Bring them home at noon. The countdown to the reveal had begun. By 11:30, a quiet crowd had gathered near the Wilson home. Neighbors, former students, teachers from Laney High, and Everyone who had worked on the renovation waited in anticipation. They parked their cars several blocks away and stood behind a line of caution tape Michael had set up to maintain a clear view of the house. Michael paced nervously on the front walkway. "Is everything ready?" he asked Dave for the 5th time. "Everything's perfect," Dave assured him. "We've triple-checked every detail." The newly planted flowers swayed in the gentle breeze. The fresh paint gleamed in the midday sun. A large red ribbon stretched across the front door, waiting to be cut. At 11:45, Michael addressed the gathered crowd. "When they arrive, please stay quiet until after they've had a chance to see inside. This is going to be overwhelming for them, and they'll need space to process it." Everyone nodded in agreement. Parents hushed excited children. Cameras were readied, but kept discreetly at waist level. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Scotty. "10 minutes away. They have no idea." Michael's heart raced. After days of intense work, countless details, and the coordination of hundreds of people, the moment was almost here. He found himself thinking about that day in the gym when he'd been cut from the varsity team. How Mr. Wilson had found him shooting baskets alone in the dark. How a few kind words had changed the course of his life. "They're coming," someone whispered, pointing down the street. Michael looked up to see a black SUV turning onto the block. Scotty was driving, with the Wilsons in the back seat. Michael took a deep breath and walked to the curb. The SUV slowed as it approached the house. Through the window, Michael could see Mr. Wilson's expression change from casual conversation to confusion as he noticed the crowd. The car stopped, and Scotty stepped out first. "What's going on?" Mr. Wilson asked as Scotty opened his door. "Why are all these people here?" Michael stepped forward as Mr. Wilson emerged from the car. "Welcome home, Mr. Wilson." Mr. Wilson looked around, bewildered. "Michael, what is this?" On the other side of the car, 2 assistants were helping Martha into her wheelchair. She looked equally confused as she took in the scene. The crowd, the transformed yard, the ribbon across their front door. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible. Michael took Mr. Wilson's arm and guided him toward Martha. Once they were together, he addressed them both. "While you were enjoying your vacation, we've been working on a little surprise for you." He gestured toward the house. "Your home needed some repairs, so we took care of them." The Wilsons stared at their house in disbelief. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a warm blue color that Martha had once mentioned loving. The cracked walkway was now a smooth, wide path. The sagging steps had been replaced by a gently sloping ramp. "You fixed our house?" Mr. Wilson asked, his voice breaking slightly. "That's just the beginning," Michael replied. "Would you like to see inside?" Martha nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. Mr. Wilson seemed too stunned to speak. Michael guided them up the new ramp to the front door. The crowd remained respectfully quiet, though many were wiping away tears of their own. "Mr. Wilson," Michael said, handing him a large pair of scissors, "would you do the honors?" With shaking hands, Mr. Wilson cut the ribbon. Michael pushed the door open, revealing the transformed interior. The Wilsons gasped in unison. Where there had once been narrow doorways and cramped rooms, there was now an open, airy space. Natural light streamed through new windows. The worn carpet was gone, replaced by gleaming hardwood floors that offered smooth passage for Martha's wheelchair. "Oh my goodness," Martha whispered, hands covering her mouth. Michael gently guided them inside. "The entire house has been redesigned to make things easier for both of you, especially with the wheelchair. He showed them the new kitchen with its lowered countertops and accessible appliances, the bathroom with its roll-in shower and safety features, the bedroom with the adjustable bed large enough for them to sleep together again. "This can't be real," Mr. Wilson kept saying. "This can't be real." In the living room, Michael showed them the special display case built for Mr. Wilson's scrapbooks. "Your collection deserved a proper home," he explained. Martha couldn't stop crying as she rolled through the rooms, discovering how every space had been thoughtfully designed for her comfort and independence. "I can reach everything," she marveled. In the kitchen, opening drawers and cabinets that had previously been impossible for her to use. Mr. Wilson stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly to take it all in. "Why?" he finally asked, looking at Michael. "Why would you do all this?" Michael placed a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Because you changed my life, Mr. Wilson. That day when I got cut from varsity, I was ready to quit basketball. But you believed in me when no one else did." "I just unlocked a door," Mr. Wilson said softly. "Sometimes that's all someone needs," Michael replied. "An open door and a chance." He guided the Wilsons toward the back of the house. "There's more to show you." The backyard had been transformed into a peaceful retreat. With raised garden beds Martha could tend from her wheelchair and a covered patio perfect for morning coffee. "And there's one more thing," Michael said, leading them back inside to the dining room table, where a folder waited. "This house isn't just fixed up. It's yours, free and clear. The mortgage has been paid in full." Martha gasped. Mr. Wilson's hand trembled as he opened the folder to find documentation confirming Michael's words. "There's more," Michael continued, gently. "We've established a trust fund that will provide monthly income for both of you for the rest of your lives. Enough that you can retire immediately, Mr. Wilson, and your medical expenses will be fully covered, Martha. No more worrying about insurance limits or out-of-pocket costs." Mr. Wilson sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "This is too much," he protested weakly. "It's not enough," Michael countered. "Not for what you've given to so many people over the years." He gestured toward the window, where the crowd outside had grown. "Those people aren't here for me, Mr. Wilson. They're here for you. Former students, neighbors, people whose lives you've touched with your kindness." On cue, the front door opened, and people began to enter, each carrying cards, small gifts, or simply stories of how Mr. Wilson had impacted their lives. "James Wilson changed my life," one middle-aged man said. "When I was failing school, he stayed late every day to help me study in the empty classroom he was cleaning. Mr. Wilson bought my son his first pair of basketball shoes when we couldn't afford them," a woman added. "He never told anyone. We never forgot." One by one, people shared their stories. Mr. Wilson sat stunned, listening as a lifetime of quiet kindness was acknowledged openly for the first time. Martha reached for her husband's hand. "I always knew. You were changing lives," she said softly. "Now, everyone else knows too." Outside, more people had gathered. Students from Laney High held signs thanking Mr. Wilson for his decades of service. The school band played a celebratory tune. As the afternoon continued, the Wilsons were surrounded by love and gratitude from a community that had come together to honor one of its most humble members. And through it all, Michael Jordan, the basketball legend, the global icon, the billionaire businessman, stood quietly to the side, watching with satisfaction as the man who had once unlocked a gym door for him received the recognition he had earned through a lifetime of quietly opening doors. For others, as evening approached, the celebration continued at the Wilson home. Neighbors had set up tables in the front yard with food and drinks. Children played games on the newly sodded lawn. The atmosphere was like a block party, with Mr. Wilson as the guest of honor. Michael observed it all from a quiet corner of the porch. He watched as Martha navigated her wheelchair effortlessly through the wide doorway, no longer trapped in her own home. He saw Mr. Wilson accepting hugs and handshakes from people whose lives he had touched, his usual modesty giving way to humble pride. Scotty joined Michael on the porch. "Mission accomplished," he said, clinking his water bottle against Michael's. "More than I ever imagined," Michael agreed. "Look at them. They're so happy." "You did good, MJ," Scotty said. "Really good." "We all did," Michael corrected him. This was a team effort. As the sky darkened, people began to leave, each stopping to say goodbye to the Wilsons. The renovation team packed up the last of their equipment. The catering staff cleaned the yard. Gradually, the crowd thinned until only a few close friends remained. Mr. Wilson finally approached Michael, who was helping fold up chairs on the new patio. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Of course," Michael replied. They walked to the far corner of the yard, where a bench had been placed under the old oak tree. Mr. Wilson sat down heavily, the emotions of the day clearly taking a toll. "I don't know how to thank you," he began. "What you've done for Martha and me. It's beyond anything I could have imagined." "You don't need to thank me," Michael said. "I'm just returning a favor that's 40 years overdue." Mr. Wilson shook his head. "This is so much more than unlocking a gym door." "To me, it's not," Michael insisted. "That unlocked door led to everything else in my life. The championships, the career, all of it. Without you believing in me that day, who knows what might have happened." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the gentle voices of the last few guests chatting on the patio. "You know what Martha said to me when we were alone for a moment?" Mr. Wilson finally asked. "She said, 'James, you've spent your whole life helping others. Now it's your turn to be helped.' I've never thought about it that way." "She's a wise woman," Michael smiled. "The thing is," Mr. Wilson continued, "I never felt like I was doing anything special, just treating people the way I'd want to be treated. Doing what seemed right in the moment." "That's what makes it special," Michael said. "You didn't help people for recognition or rewards. You did it because that's who you are." Mr. Wilson looked toward the house, where Martha was showing a friend the new kitchen from her wheelchair. "You've given us our life back, you know. Martha can move around our home again. I can sleep beside my wife instead of on that floor mattress. And I don't have to worry about leaving her alone while I work." "Speaking of work," Michael said, "Principal Jenkins wanted me to tell you he's holding your job if you want it, but you don't need to work anymore. The trust fund will provide more than your salary did." Mr. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. "I've worked every day since I was 16 years old," he said slowly. "Don't know what I'd do with myself if I wasn't working." "Maybe there are other ways to stay connected to the school," Michael suggested. "Teaching assistant, mentor, school historian. You know more about Laney High than anyone alive." "That might be nice," Mr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Share some stories with the young folks, though I doubt they'd be interested in an old man's memories." "You'd be surprised," Michael assured him. "Kids today need role models like you more than ever." As they talked, Martha wheeled herself toward them, her movements confident on the smooth new pathway. "There you are," she said. "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." "Just trying to find words to thank Michael," Mr. Wilson explained. Martha reached out and took Michael's hand. "I don't think there are enough words in the English language for that," she said softly. "But maybe you don't need words when your heart is this full." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "The pleasure was all mine. Not just yours, Martha corrected him, gesturing toward the few remaining guests. Look at how many lives you've touched with this project. Not just ours. She was right. The renovation had brought together hundreds of people. Former students reconnecting with their past, neighbors becoming friends, strangers working side by side toward a common goal. I have something to show you both, Michael said, standing up. One last surprise. He led them to the small room at the back of the house that had once been used for storage. The door was closed. Before you open this door, Michael said, I need to tell you something, Mr. Wilson. When we started this project, it was about fixing your house and setting you up financially. But it became something more, something bigger. Mr. Wilson looked confused. Your story, your life of service and kindness, inspired everyone who worked on this renovation. And we all started asking the same question. How many other Mr. Wilsons are out there? How many people working essential jobs are overlooked or undervalued? Michael reached for the doorknob. So we decided to do something about that. He opened the door. Inside, the former storage room had been transformed into a beautiful home office. A desk faced the window overlooking the backyard. Bookshelves lined one wall. A comfortable chair sat in the corner beside a reading lamp. I don't understand, Mr. Wilson said, looking around the room. Martha wheeled herself inside, examining the space. What is this for, Michael? Michael pointed to the wall above the desk, where a framed document hung. That's the incorporation paperwork for the James Wilson Foundation. Its mission is to recognize and support school support staff, janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, maintenance people who make a difference in students' lives. Mr. Wilson stepped closer to read the document, his eyes widening. Named after me. You're the inspiration, Michael explained. The foundation will provide scholarships, emergency financial assistance, and recognition programs for the people who keep our schools running, but often go unnoticed. And this office? Martha asked. If you want it, Michael said to Mr. Wilson, there's a position waiting for you as the foundation's first executive director. You'd help identify deserving recipients, share your wisdom about what these workers really need, and be the public face of the organization. Public face? Mr. Wilson looked alarmed. I'm not good at public speaking. Your life speaks for itself, Michael assured him. And I'll be right beside you as the foundation's primary donor. We've already raised $3 million to start, with commitments for annual donations from several major companies and athletes. Mr. Wilson sat down in the desk chair, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Martha urged him, tears in her eyes. This is your chance to help others in a whole new way, James, to turn your experience into something bigger than yourself. Mr. Wilson looked around the office, his office, and then back at Michael. Why me? There must be more qualified people. There's no one more qualified to represent the heart of this foundation than you, Michael said. The foundation doesn't need another businessman or fundraiser. It needs someone who understands the value of showing up every day, doing your job, with pride and caring about the people around you. That's you, Mr. Wilson. After a long moment, Mr. Wilson nodded. Then, yes, I accept. Martha clapped her hands in delight. My husband, the foundation director. Who would have thought? As they left the office, returning to the main living area where the last few guests were preparing to leave, Mr. Wilson turned to Michael. You know, when I was a young man just starting at Laney, my father gave me some advice. He said, James, you might just be mopping floors, but do it like you're changing the world, because you never know whose life you might affect. He looked around at his transformed home, at his beaming wife, at the office where he would start a new chapter of his life's work. "I guess he was right," Mr. Wilson said softly. Michael smiled. He was right. And now everyone knows it. As the last guests departed and the Wilsons prepared to spend their first night in their renovated home, Michael took one final walk through the house. He stopped at the display case holding Mr. Wilson's scrapbooks, including the one filled with clippings about Michael's own career. Next to it was a new scrapbook, its first page already filled with photos of the renovation process and the celebration. Michael left a note on top of the new scrapbook. "Mr. Wilson, you once believed in me when no one else did. You opened doors that led me to places I never imagined. Now it's your turn to walk through a new door, one that leads to recognition, respect, and the chance to help others the way you've always done. Everyone needs someone who believes in them before they can believe in themselves. You were that someone for me. Now I hope I can be that someone for you. With deepest gratitude, Michael." As Michael drove away from the Wilson home, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The porch light glowed warmly against the evening sky. Inside that house, a man who had changed countless lives without recognition was finally receiving the acknowledgement he deserved. And that, Michael thought, was the greatest victory of his career. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so leave a comment below sharing your location and what part of Michael and Mr. Wilson's journey moved you the most. For another inspiring story that will move you just as much, click the video appearing on your screen right now. You won't want to miss it.